There is a man on the far side of a desert who has spent 40 years trying to be forgotten. He was a prince once. Now he's a shepherd, which in Egypt was the lowest thing a person could be, and he chose it on purpose. He married into a quiet family. He learned the names of rocks and the paths of goats, and he let the fire in him go out. The last time it burned, he killed a man and had to run, and the desert is a good place to bury a fire. His name is Moses, and this morning he's following the flock deeper into the wilderness than he usually goes, toward a mountain, when he sees something on the slope that stops him. A bush is on fire. That by itself isn't strange. Dry scrub in that country catches and burns and is gone in under a minute, a flare, a curl of smoke, ash. He's seen it 100 times. So he waits for the bush to be gone. It doesn't go. The flames keep moving through the branches, and the branches keep not burning up. Whatever is feeding that fire, it isn't the bush, because the bush is only where it happens to be showing. And out of that fire, a voice says his name, twice. Moses, Moses. And Moses, who has spent 40 years unlearning how to hope, asks the fire a question. The answer he gets back is a single short sentence that we've carried for 3,000 years, printed in our Bibles in 2 flat capital letters, as if it were a fact carved in stone. I am. Here's the strange part. In Hebrew, it was never a statue. It was moving the whole time, the way that fire was moving, and English froze it the moment it touched the page. I want to show you what the name is actually doing, because when you see it, one of the loneliest feelings a person can carry starts to come apart. The sentence God gives Moses is 3 Hebrew words. Our translations lock them into the present. I am that I am. And the present tense makes God sound like a philosophy, a being who simply exists. True and cold, the kind of God you can believe in and still feel completely alone with. But the Hebrew verb underneath those words doesn't sit still in the present. It leans forward. It carries a going to be and I will be, a presence that's on its way toward you and hasn't finished arriving. And the proof isn't a clever theory. It's sitting 2 verses earlier in the very same conversation, where God uses that exact word to say something that changes what the name can possibly mean. Hold on to that. 2 verses earlier. We'll get there, and when we do, the name is going to define itself right in front of you. But to feel the weight of it, you have to stand where Moses is standing first, because he didn't ask this question out of curiosity. He asked it out of fear. And before we go further, I want to say something about the way most of us learned this name, because the common reading isn't stupid. It came from somewhere good. I am, the God who simply is, the uncaused one, the God who depends on nothing and no one, who was here before the mountains and will be here after the stars burn out. If you were taught that, you were taught something true and something worth trembling over. That reading protected a real treasure, that God is not one more thing inside the universe, kept alive by something bigger than himself. He's the ground the whole thing stands on. Every hymn that calls him eternal, every prayer that leans on his unchangingness, is drinking from that well. Keep it. We're not throwing it away. But here's what I've noticed in myself, and maybe in you. A God who only is, timeless, self-sufficient, complete, can start to feel like he doesn't need you in the room. You can worship a fact and still feel like you're talking to the ceiling. You can believe every true thing about God's existence and still, on the hard nights, feel utterly on your own. The name has a second half that English couldn't hold, and that second half is aimed straight at the loneliness. So go back to the bush and slow all the way down, because the setting is doing more work than we give it credit for. Moses is 80 years old. He isn't a firebrand looking for a cause. He's a man who failed once at rescuing his people, dramatically and violently and alone, and who has spent 4 decades since then convinced that the story of his life is already over. Everything he says to God in this chapter, he says from inside that conviction. Who am I that I should go? They won't believe me. I'm not a good speaker. He isn't being humble. He's being honest about a fire he let die. And the God who speaks to him has, up to this point in the story, mostly been called by titles. The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Notice what those are, They're relationships. God has been introducing himself for generations, not as a definition, but as a companion, the one who walked with your fathers. He's been keeping company with this family for 400 years, most of them silent, all of them slaves now in Egypt, crying out. So when God finally says, I have heard their cry, I know their sorrows, and I have come down to bring them up, that phrase come down matters. This is not a God phoning in orders from a throne. This is a God who descends, who shows up at ground level, in a bush, in a wilderness, to a wanted man. Now watch Moses do the thing we all do. He deflects with logistics. When I tell them the God of your fathers sent me, and they ask me his name, what do I say? On the surface, it's a practical question. Underneath it is the real one. The one every frightened person is actually asking when they ask God who he is. Are you the kind of God who will actually be there when this gets hard? Or are you going to send me back into Egypt and disappear? And here's the sentence I need you to see, because it comes before the famous name, and almost nobody reads them together. Back up to verse 12. Moses says, "Who am I to go?" And God doesn't answer the question Moses asked. God doesn't say, "You're stronger than you think." He says something better. He says, "I will be with you. I will be with you." In Hebrew, that promise, "I will be," is one word, Ehyeh. Hold that word in your hand, because we're about to watch God pick it back up. 2 verses later, when Moses asks for the name, God takes that exact same word, the word he just used to promise his presence, and he says it twice, and he hands it over as his name. Ehyeh, Asher, Ehyeh. Same word, 2 verses apart. First a promise, then a name. And we've spent 3,000 years reading the name without reading the promise it's made of. So let's say plainly what the Hebrew is doing. The name God gives is built entirely out of the verb Ehyeh, to be, to become, to happen, to be present. And Ehyeh is that verb in what Hebrew calls the incomplete aspect. Hebrew doesn't slice time into past, present, and future the tidy way English does. It marks whether an action is finished or unfinished, done, or still unfolding. And God chooses the unfinished one, deliberately, for his own name. Which means I am is a legitimate reading, but it's one still frame pulled out of something that was moving. Underneath it, just as fairly, is I will be, I am becoming, I will be there. The name isn't a statue of a God who exists. It's a verb of a God who keeps arriving. Now watch the text translate itself 3 times, so you know I'm not selling you a feeling. 1. Verse 12. The promise we just read. Ehyeh imak, I will be with you. Same word as the name. God defines his own name 2 verses before he gives it, and the definition is presence. He's telling Moses, the name you're about to ask for, you already heard it. It's the promise I just made you. 2. Follow that word forward, and it becomes the heartbeat of the entire covenant. Again and again, through Moses, through the prophets, God says a version of the same line. I will be your God, and you will be my people. Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Leviticus. The refrain keeps returning, and the engine of it is always that same verb of being toward. The name isn't a one-time riddle at a bush. It's the promise God spends the rest of the Bible keeping. 3. Now jump the whole distance to a courtyard in Jerusalem, centuries later, where a man is standing trial for blasphemy. The crowd is arguing about Abraham, and he says something that makes them pick up stones on the spot. Before Abraham was, I am. He didn't say, I was. He reached back and picked up the burning bush name and put it on himself. Whatever you make of that man, the gospel writers are telling you the name didn't stay at the bush. It kept walking forward. It kept arriving, which is exactly what the verb always promised it would do. 3 witnesses. The promise before the name, the covenant that carries it, and the echo that picks it up again. The text defines itself. This was never a fact about God's existence. It was always a promise about his presence. So put the 2 readings side by side and feel the difference in your chest, because it's enormous. I am, frozen, gives you a God who exists, impressive, distant, a God you can prove and never meet. You can hold that God the way you hold a theorem, true, settled, and no comfort at all at 3 in the morning. I will be with you, which is the same name unfrozen, gives you a God who is coming, who is right now on his way toward the exact place you're standing, whose defining characteristic is not that he sits above your life, but that he shows up inside it. That's the whole turn. The most famous name in human history, the name too holy for Israel to even say out loud, is at its root a promise to be there, not a boast about being eternal, a vow to be present. And notice what that does to the fear Moses walked in with. He asked, basically, "Are you going to leave me out there alone?" And the name is the answer. The name is God saying, my very identity, the thing I call myself, is that I will be with you. Leaving is the one thing this God cannot do without ceasing to be himself. You didn't have to climb the mountain to find him. That's the bush all over again. The fire came down. It always comes down. If that just landed somewhere in you, if the loneliness moved even an inch, take 1 second and subscribe, because that's the whole reason this channel exists. To go back to the words we think we've worn smooth and find the promise still burning underneath. There are people in your life who feel like they're talking to the ceiling right now, and this is the video that might reach them. So subscribe and stay with me, because there's a second half to this name that guards against getting it too comfortable, and it's every bit as good as the first. Here's where a lot of well-meaning people take this beautiful thing and quietly bend it out of shape. Once you hear I will be with you, it's tempting to shrink the name down to, I will be whatever you need me to be. A God who fills in the blank however your heart wants. A comfort that asks nothing and confronts nothing. A presence with no edges. But look again at the actual grammar, because it fences that off. Ehyeh, Asher, Ehyeh. I will be who I will be. That middle word, Asher, is God reserving the right to define himself. He's not handing Moses a name Moses can manage. He's not a force you summon with the right technique or the right words. He's saying, I will be present, yes, and I will be present as myself, on my own terms, free. That's the second half of the gift, and it's easy to miss because it doesn't sound like comfort at first. But think about it for 1 honest second. A God who is merely whatever you need would be a mirror, and a mirror can't rescue anyone. It can only show you your own face. The reason the name can carry the weight of the Exodus, the reason it can walk into Egypt and break an empire, is that the God who says, I will be with you, is the same God who says, I will be who I will be, present and sovereign in the same breath. He comes close without ever becoming small. So the name has a ditch on both sides. On one side, a God so eternal he feels absent. On the other, a God so present he's just a projection of my wishes, and the name walks the ridge between them. I will be with you. That's the nearness. I will be who I will be. That's the freedom. You get a real person, not a doctrine and not a genie. And one more thing, honestly, because you'll see it everywhere online, and I don't want to sell you something that isn't solid. You may have heard that God's name, the 4 Hebrew letters behind all of this, is actually the sound of breathing, that every breath you take is quietly speaking his name. It's a genuinely beautiful idea, and I understand why it's everywhere, but I have to be straight with you. Linguistically, that one is contested and usually overstated. The letters don't cleanly work that way, and careful Hebrew scholars are cautious about it. I'd rather hand you the thing the text can actually bear, a name that's a verb of presence, than a lovely claim that falls apart when you press on it. The truth here is strong enough, it doesn't need the help. So let me stop talking about a bush in a desert and talk about you, wherever you're sitting right now. Maybe you're the person who has kept God at the level of an idea. You believe you could pass the test? You know he's eternal and holy and unchanging, and all of it is true, and none of it has warmed you in a long time. You've been holding the I am, and it's been sitting in your hands like a cold stone. Hear the rest of the name. He's not only the God who is, he's the God who says, I will be with you. And he said it first to a failure at the far edge of a wilderness who was sure his story was over. If he came down for that man, the distance you feel is not because he's far. He's already on his way to where you are. Or maybe you're in a stretch where he feels gone. You've prayed into what sounds like an empty room, and the silence has started to feel like an answer. I won't pretend the silence isn't real, but I'll tell you what his name is, because his name is not I was with you. It's not I might be if you get it right. It is I will be. Present, ongoing, unfinished, still arriving. The verb has no full stop in it. Whatever this season is, it's inside the sentence, not after it. Or maybe you're tired for the opposite reason, tired of a God you feel like you have to operate. The right words, the right formula, the right amount of faith, and then maybe he shows up. And I want you to feel the relief hiding in I will be who I will be. He's not yours to summon. That's not bad news. That's the end of the exhausting project of managing God. You don't run the fire. You just get to stand near it and not be consumed. The pressure was never yours to carry. 3 different aches and one name for all of them. I will be with you. Go back to the bush one last time. A fire that burns and does not burn out. Fuel that never turns to ash. For 40 years, Moses had believed that fire was a thing you spend, that you get one, and you use it up. And then you spend the rest of your life in the desert, learning to live with the smoke. And God draws him toward a flame that breaks that rule, present and not diminished, burning and not consumed, giving light without running down. That bush is the name. That's what Ehyeh looks like when you can see it, a presence that pours itself out toward you and never empties, a God who is with you and is not thereby made smaller. Fire that comes down to ground level, into the wilderness, into the exact spot where a wanted man is standing, and does not go out. We froze it into 2 capital letters and set it on a shelf. I am. And it was true. It just was never the whole of it. Underneath the statue, the verb was moving the entire time, leaning forward, still speaking. I will be. I will be with you. I will be who I will be. The most famous name in the world was never a fact to believe. It was always a promise to trust. And it's still burning. If someone came to mind while you were listening, someone who feels like they're talking to the ceiling, send them this. That's how the fire gets carried. And if you want to keep going back to the words underneath the words, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.